inseam pockets. I've already gone and finished all the edges on the side seam and all sides of my pocket piece. I've pinned my pocket in place according to where it should be along the side seam. I'm going to stitch now. Not the full seam allowance. For this example, the seam allowance will be 5/8 of an inch on this side seam inseam pocket. So when stitching the pocket piece to the exterior, you don't take the full 5/8 inch. I'm going to take 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm starting part of the way down, not so. My needle is lined up right here. So it's probably about 3/8 of an inch down from the top of my pocket. And I'll stop about the same distance from the bottom of my pocket. As you can see, there's extra at the top and bottom of my pocket, and that will come in handy later. To make the next step easier, press your seam allowance towards the pocket piece. Now place one on top of the other, lining up your pockets where they meet. Place a pin about anywhere from 3/8 of an inch to an inch down from where that stitch line begins and ends. And then pin the rest of your side seam. Next, you'll sew from the top to this pin and back stitch right here. Then you'll start here, back stitching, and then stitching all the way to your hem. Now, following my pattern seam allowance, I'm going to stitch, as I stated before, from the top all the way to a little below where the pocket, the seam that attaches the pocket starts. I went ahead and pinned my pocket pieces together with the fold over seam allowance together, pinning that all the way around, and the other part of the seam allowance folded over is pinned as well. Now I'll sew this seam allowance, or this seam, around the pocket. Since it is a pocket, you could basically do any seam allowance that you want. So I'm going to probably go at 3/8 of an inch, which is fairly close up around the serged edge. As you sew, make sure to pull the rest of your garment out of the way so that you're only sewing the pocket pieces. And remember to backstitch at the beginning and end. fold fold the seam allowance with the pocket towards your front. Trim at an angle to help from fraying. The seam allowance on the back so that you can open it up on both the bottom and the top. So you're just cutting into that. Do not cut the stitch line. Open this seam up here and press everything. Is we're going to go and from this side up to this stitch line to our main seam allowance is just stitch through all this to tack it in place. Now I'm going to basically tack these seam allowances together. Starting on the pocket piece at the seam allowance. Sewing all the way through before this seam. So you can do it from this side, or it might be easier to do it from this side, because then you can see your stitch line and where you're going up to. So now those pieces are all tacked down. So now when you're wearing your garment, your pocket will always point towards the front and it won't go towards the back. And then you have your nice little opening where you can't see the pocket lining.